Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May our study be, or our work be, full of vigor and strength. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. There's a fundamental principle within Vedanta that there is only oneness of being. Of course, that's not our experience, other than in specific general cases. We know, for example, that there is one humanity. We know that despite the fact that we find different countries everywhere on the globe, there is one globe. Despite the fact that there are several planets seeming to rotate around the sun, there's only one solar system. And in that solar system, there's only one home that we have called the Milky Way galaxy. But the further we go on, we find that there are all these various divisions spread far apart. And yet, all of this seeming fragmentation comes down to very, very little. If we were to collect all the nucleus of all the atoms on this earth, they would all fit into a fair-sized football field. And yet it doesn't look like that. And this principle within Vedanta of unity and oneness says there's only one thing that exists. To reconcile that with our experience is our greatest difficulty. And then other questions arise. How does becoming come from being? And there are various answers to this. Some worthy of entertainment, and others not so much. In the 6th century, before the current era, there was a Greek philosopher. His name was Parmenides, 6th century BCE. He was born in Italy. And he said stuff is eternal. Universe is eternal, and the universe is made from stuff or matter, and that's eternal. Well, that's equivalent to saying that being is the same as non-being. So we immediately come across a philosophical, rational difficulty. So how to reconcile these? There's a modern way of thinking in the material line as well that perpetuates this, that says that all this something comes from nothing, that existence comes from non-existence. But any rational person will say that's sheer nonsense. Something must be existent. And what is that? But the Vedanta philosophy is very adamant. There is only one being. The second principle is that when we find the inner source of your own individual self, it is one and the same with that. But then how do you explain all the diversity and individuation that we experience? Well, it is all in the relative world. It is all relevant to the organs of perception, which themselves are part and parcel of a changing world. Then what's the definition of this oneness? How can we get to a position where we can assert it is true? Is there a logical sequence whereby we can find it out? And is there a way of catching up our individual experience? This whole subject is under the review and preview, actually, of modern physics. Modern physics. I said I would not, for a long time, I would refrain from talking anything about physics. But we have to. We have to know and understand what is this world. And therefore, we have to understand the third principle within Vedanta, and that is that This world is mithya, this world is an appearance, this world is ephemeral, this world is not what it looks like. And how to get used to such an idea? When we evaluate things from the point of view of the reality must be that which doesn't change. It's not subject to any fluctuations. Imagine now if before you a mouse suddenly appears and then vanishes. You'll rub your eyes. You'll hardly believe it. You'll dismiss it. You'll say it was something like an illusion. And supposing that same mouse reappears and changes into an elephant, magically, you'll rub your eyes again. This time you might run away also, if it's a wild elephant. The point is the transition from a mouse to an elephant happening suddenly. How can you believe it? Now the second example is an example of biological evolution. We can't believe it. You may be aware that I say with a sense of fun to some people, some biologists for example, I can't believe in evolution since I believe in totality. And some get it, and some don't. You see, if you have a picture of a holistic universe where there's only one thing there, then all the changes are illusory. Illusory in the sense that, from our perspective, where we cannot see any totality whatsoever, we'll only see partial changes. We'll see it within the framework of something that is very unreliable, namely a structure of time and space and causation. The great physicist John Wheeler had this difficulty. His problem was, how is it that no matter how different atomic structures are in their end result, they always come out the same values. They're always identical, but different combinations. Then he stumbled on a very interesting idea. What if there's only one fundamental particle? And what we see as differences is that same particle, just in different forms. The very great physicist Werner Heisenberg dispensed with matter completely. Don't think that this is modern science. This great Heisenberg said, modern atomic theory is essentially different from that of antiquity, in that it no longer allows any reinterpretation or elaboration to make it fit into a naive, materialistic concept of the universe. For atoms are no longer material bodies. Now he's saying this over 100 years ago, or more or less 100 years ago anyway. A great, great physicist. This is the conclusion of modern physics. And yet today we are still taking Newtonian physics seriously. We're still taking the pronouncements of Parmenides. Newtonian physics, the great man was Newton. But Newton decided that all particles were absolutely hard and solid, unbreakable. See what a particle means. It means a small part of something. And the Indian philosophies long ago had determined if you have a part of anything, it's not for its own independent good, but it's for the good of another. And you can take any example of that and find it out. Similarly, in the human body, there are various parts. You know yourself, you must have noticed that there's an arm hanging on one side, another one on the other. You must have noticed something protruding from the head called a nose or an ear. All these parts are there, and we can break it down because we know from modern biology that these parts are made from molecules and they're made from cells, and the cells have something like an independent life. They have a capacity to respirate, a capacity to assimilate. They're almost as if they have an independent life that decides to cooperate in a mass that is called a human body. What a wonderful cooperative thing, but what's the driving force? What's the thing that holds it together? Now the Upanishads ask the same question. What is that holds everything together? like a string? This arises in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. And the answer is, well, it is life that does it. It's something like a string that holds all life. But when life is described, you're taking a broad generalized sweep. You're going to the broadest, most holistic version that you can think of, so that we can see how we are linked. And so one axiom has to be there, namely that whatever happens on a microcosmic level, a small world, you live in a small world. And your small world is exaggerated in proportion when you see the context of the bigger world. The bigger world, let us take, for example, the world that we call the earth. And let us take another world. Let us take the world that takes billions and billions of years to get to. Let's say 15 billion years to get to the edge of our observable universe. Let's take the smallest possible scale we can think of. It's called a Planck Scale. It's 10 to the minus 35 meters. That means you take 10, you minus 10, you put 35 noughts on it. It's a vast number. You can't actually see it. You know, if you take a sponge and you look at it closely, you'll see different gaps, different fibers. It's not just a single unit. From a distance, it looks like one thing. When you look at it closely, it's full of holes. That's what makes it a sponge. It's what makes it absorbent, that is alternated material and hollows, voids, and becomes absorbent. This Planck scale you can't see. When we look at the tiniest versions of this in a Large Hadron Collider, it's something like 10 to the minus 25 meters. And even then we can hardly see it. It's not seen, it's not visible, it can be hardly detected, barely detected. That's the smallest we can go. We're 10 noughts missing already. Then at the highest scale, the vastest scale, the most magnanimous scale, you find 10 to the 25 microns plus. 10 with 25, 10, 25 noughts going on. That's the largest thing we can ever conceive of. Now here's the curious thing that is very satisfying. Right in between that scale, between the tiniest and the vastest that we can ever measure or think of, there is the biological cell, the single cell. And every other form of organic life is just a combination of these single cells. That lies in the very, very heart, the very, very middle. What a wonderful, wonderful formation. Can we call it coincidence? Can we see how mathematically beautiful it is? Can we see how the rhythm and the regularity of what we see seems to indicate some thrusting entity behind it all, manifesting everywhere? And this, when not manifesting, is called potential, not and nothing. So you have three possibilities. There's either nothing, or there is this particle, this hard, solid thing that Isaac Newton was keen on, and that has been perpetuated till today, giving us laws of causation and time and space. But a man called John Wheeler wrote up this question that I mentioned and came to this conclusion. Maybe there's only one thing. And then you have to introduce what is called the quantum level. Quantum level means haze. It's very hazy. Something behaves like a wave and a particle, both. Something moves in terms of packets, and yet it is called a wave-particle duality, erroneously so. If this holistic view is true, if this oneness is true, then when you look at it in one way, it looks like a wave. And when you look at it another way, it looks like a particle. When you take the space dimension, see waves spread out everywhere. You can't restrain them. And waves have the habit of dancing. Waves have the habit of interfering with one another. So that if you push even one small atom through two slits, then there's an interference pattern. A wave gets distributed. You can't tell which way it went. So there is much invisible to our naked eye. Modern science has told this. But to continue with Heisenberg, he says that for atoms are no longer material bodies in the proper sense of this word. The experiences of present-day physics, which continue till today, show us that atoms do not exist as simple material objects. They are waves, and they are invisible. The materialistic point of view is what we can see is what is there, bypassing the whole restrictions of the organs that can pick it up and measure it. And so maybe there is one wave system. So we go from matter to waves. The next step is to go from waves to numbers. Because when you come to this, the waves are extended in space, then the particles are localized, and the waves are what we might call legato. Particles are staccato, almost static, therefore solid. So when we observe the world, but we find things which are not empirical to our sense organs, and yet they are a reality. They are there. They are there because we can measure the effects. So that means there is no such thing as nothing. It means that even where there seems to be a void, the tiniest proportion of a particle, the innermost core, is proportionately miles and miles and miles away from the dancing electrons that you cannot really fix or locate. As soon as you try to fix it, it's gone. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Yet in between, this is a void. It's not that there's nothing there. It's that possibility is there. So the range of possibilities tells us that things can come in and come out. Things can appear, things can disappear. Something like a magic show. And this we call Maya. What is Maya? The paradox that things seem to be there and fixed. And yet, when you look at them closely, they all disappear into cloud. All an ephemeral existence, disappearing and dissipating. As soon as you try to touch it, like a dream, as soon as you try to grasp and touch it, it's gone, vanished. Something like what you see as a mirage in a desert. A mirage in a desert, vanishing as soon as it is discovered. Now the example for this, of course, in the Vedanta philosophy is the famous example of the snake and the rope appearing and disappearing. This aspect, of course, we are familiar with, but we have to contemplate it really to fully understand the purport of it. The Sankhya philosophers, they hold something like a different view. They describe the universe as the modification of this potentiality. They don't call it potentiality, they call it prakriti. But it is in fact a potentiality because it's not formed. You only see or register a thing when there's a disturbance. But if there's no disturbance, if there's all in equilibrium, you don't know whether the thing exists or not. But nevertheless, for it to manifest in any kind of formation, it must already be there, waiting in potentiality. So according to them, the cause manifests itself as the effect. And then the effect, before it is produced, it exists as the cause. So you can't really distinguish between cause and effect other than in its modifications, in its form. And according to another school of philosophers, and that includes the dualists and also the theists, those who believe in God, the universe did not exist before it was created. It comes from just ex nihilo, nothing. So the fact is non-existent before it's produced. Now the great non-dualist in the Vedanta, Shankaracharya, he points out the utter impossibility of the finite mind's ever understanding the nature of the universe in terms of any causal relationship. Now let's go back to John Wheeler. John Wheeler was fascinated by time. What he thought was, if you have one atom that is agitating, or let's say an electron that is agitating, then a radiation occurs and it has a knock-on effect on another atom. And for that to happen, of course, there must be a messenger, a light messenger, call it a proton. And the problem is, does it work the other way around? When you lose something, when something radiates and affects another particle or subatomic particle, that has to happen over time. Then because that agitates, will it come back to the original particle? Now, it would take an enormous amount of time to do that. So he postulated maybe the whole thing is surrounded by particles and everything affects everything. And maybe we don't need this forward movement of time because maybe there was a time when the effect on the original atom was there before it agitated. In other words, time reversed. If time is something like a record of events moving forward, well, can it not also move backwards? Why should it only move in one direction? The conventional idea is it moves in one direction because of this causal law. So if you do away with this particular linear structure of time, you've done away with causation itself. But maybe causation itself is also part of the illusion. Maybe time itself is part of the illusion. Maybe space is part of the illusion. And therefore, maybe individual function that seems to respond to all of that is part of the illusion. So, Shankaracharya would speak of the universe as Maya because, as every thoughtful person will now know and register, even while perceiving it with the senses, its nature is one of impermanence. And if it's impermanent, we can't just leave it there. Some permanent entity must be there. Something must exist. Existence itself has to be there. Otherwise, nothing else exists. It's just logic. And so when Sri Shankaracharya calls the universe Maya, he's not introducing a magic idea, he's simply stating a fact. And the fact is just this, that the One appears inexplicably as many. Inexplicably. And when a snake is beheld in place of a rope, in the famous example, then the phenomena may be described as Maya. But this doesn't simply imply an explanation of how or why the rope should appear as it appears. It only states a tangible fact. It appears. Believe me, it appears. And in the same sense, a mirage is Maya, and dream objects are Maya, and the creation, so-called, is Maya. The whole thing is an appearance. And so Vedantists will use alternate terms Avidya is one of them. That is the ignorance of not seeing things in their true perspective. Or ajnana, a lack of understanding. And prakriti of the Sankhyas as practically synonymous with this Maya. In fact, the word Maya, of course, generally signifies cosmic illusion, on account of which Brahman or pure consciousness appears, among other things, as the creator of the universe, and from there on the universe itself. And under the influence of avidya or nescience, that entity in you called Atman, or pure consciousness, appears as what we call the soul, jiva, the individual self, or the individualized self. But this ignorance or ajnana that makes the absolute appear as the relative, or the one as the many. So the word prakriti or matter or nature is not the solid nature of Newton. It is potentiality. And modern physics has endorsed it. It's endorsed it through a famous equation to understand the wave particle nature. And this is called Schrodinger's equation. Schrodinger brings out the idea that we can possibly understand approximately where something might be if we are really interested to find it out. John Wheeler's student, Richard Feynman, proposed a beautiful idea. It was called the Sum of Histories. Let's put it this way. Imagine I ask you, how did you come here to the ashram? And you say, I came by train, and I came by bus, and I came by Uber, and I came by taxi, and I came by walking, and I came by running, and I came by bicycle. Well, how can you do it all simultaneously? It's not possible. Well, in the normal deterministic causal world, no, it has to be one or the other. But in the subtle world of Maya, all possibilities are there, simultaneously there. But the most likely would depend. For example, supposing it's expensive to come by taxi, then maybe it's not likely that you did it. Supposing it's much more convenient to have come by bus, then the highest possibility is you came by bus, but the curiosity is all the other possibilities are still standing there in the quantum world. The quantum world, we can say, is the world of Maya. So, in answer to the question, is there really one? The undoubted answer is yes, there is only one. Swami Vivekananda, in his Jnana Yoga, he gives a small statement like this under his lecture, Practical Vedanta. He says, all differences in this world are of degree and not of kind, because oneness is the secret of everything. All is the one, and the one manifests itself either as thought or life or soul or body. Now, just taking what we had said earlier, matter is no longer in the modern science. Materialists are using the wrong paradigm because matter is now dispelled. At the subatomic level, there is no matter, there is only a hazy thing, a kind of oscillation, if you will, that can appear and disappear, that has its opposite side as a positron and can be seen on the other edge, on the other side of time. And when this manifests as an A or a B, we register it. In other words, when it modifies itself and behaves in a certain way, we see it as something solid, even though our reality says that if you do a volume analysis it's all empty space. It looks like something solid, but when you look at it, just like when you see a sponge, and then when you look at it closely, it's all voids. What you call the solid body is nothing but empty space, with a few occasional oscillations that we interpret as particulate matter. That's the scientific fact about it. So he says, all is the one, and the one manifests itself either as thought or life or soul or body. And when you resolve all of this matter into waves, then you resolve the waves into numbers, because these are invisible. You cannot see them. You cannot touch them. You cannot taste them. You can't lick them. They're not responsive to any of the senses. We can't even conceive of such things. So we're dealing with the inconceivable, the invisible. Look at this description when we talk about Brahman. We're using the same language. Invisible, not tangible. We're saying that it is something that cannot be seen. No one can conceive of it. There, the mind comes back together with the senses. That kind of language is being used. But in this world of possibilities, that's all we have is possibilities. Then it's a world of numbers. It's an abstract world of numbers. And that means, therefore, that what we are seeing is information transfer. We're seeing really two things. We're seeing the information side and we're seeing the deception side, both of them. The information side is akin to thought. Now we're coming close to a Vedantic cosmological construct. If it is all thought, if all these waves are reduced to numbers, and numbers are processing information, then this is thought. We can therefore say the whole world is a series of waves of thought. And where is it coming from? If we take generalization as the way forward, as the one that will help us to discover the truth about things, the more generalized, the more subtle, becomes the more truthful. Then we have to come to this conclusion of a single cosmic mind that manifests the inherent possibilities from the area of potential possibilities that we call Prakriti or Maya. He says, this being so, we have no right to look down with contempt upon those who are not developed exactly in the same degree as we are. And so here we find all this theory coming out in a practical sense. What use is all this, to know all this? First of all, we won't value the world as we previously did. But secondly, we'll insert a higher value into it, a value of unity. And that means when we insert this unity, we have now solved all of the difficulties in this universe. And this is one thing, universe. We don't say multiverse, we say universe. It's only one verse. If we see this unity of existence, if we see this play of waves, our approach, even in our ignorance, will be different. If we only understand it in principle, and then make some kind of practice that makes our emotion catch up to it, through various yogic discipline, through various spiritual practices, where we clarify things for ourselves. Because if it is all thought, and if the localized version of it is our mind, then it is the mind that has to decipher it all out, work it all out, and you can only do it when the mind is of pristine clarity. And so let us purify the mind. And when we do that, then we won't condemn anybody, because we'll see this unity existence. Vivekananda says, if you can stretch out a helping hand, do so with this unity in mind. If you cannot, then fold your hands, bless your brothers, and let them go their own way. Dragging down and condemning is not the way to work. Never is work accomplished in that way. We spend our energies in condemning others. Criticism and condemnation are a vain way of spending our energies, for in the long run, we come to learn that all are seeking the same thing. All are seeking the same thing, are more or less approaching the same ideal, and that most of our differences are merely differences of expression. It's a wonderful jump. It's a wonderful thing from going to this oneness of the universe, this oneness of our own delusion, to come down to how we read it, and then in practical life, how we deal with others because of it. The whole principle of the Vedanta and its oneness is one side of the coin, with the other that it provides for a diversification on the other, which is simply the expression of nothing else but possibilities. We are living in a world of possibilities. So Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, Schrodinger's measurement, his wave function, allows us to see the world as Maya. But do we take it seriously? Or do we get caught in the trap? We've heard of the expression, the trap of Maya. Do we see the superimposition of a snake on a rope, which involves two essential deceiving things: superimposing and projecting something and hiding it. And nature itself is doing it. We ourselves are part of it, but nature itself is doing it, appearing and disappearing in what is termed virtual particles, a virtual void in a virtual world. And so this word prakriti, used by the Sankhyas, matter or nature, used to denote Maya also as the material out or stuff of which the universe has been created. That is how it is. But in actual practice, these distinctions, of course, are not always maintained between these two different terms. But we can actually substitute both by saying a world of possibilities. This is the language of modern science. This is a world of possibilities. The original word Maya, of course, is used in the Rig Veda to denote some kind of magical or deceptive power. There is, it is said in the Rig Veda, that Indra, through the help of Maya, assumed different forms. And we can now see how relevant these images and stories are to what the conclusions are in this modern world. In the Upanishads, the world, of course, acquires a philosophical significance. We read, for example, in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, no prakriti, it uses the term, no prakriti or nature to be Maya, and the great Lord to be the master of Maya. And I think it's useful to insert this word, potentialities. Or Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, truly, this divine Maya of mine, consisting of these three evolutionary forces, these binding elements, these deceptive strands that we call gunas, is hard to overcome. In other words, it's hard to see the world in this united sense and this ephemeral sense. But those who take refuge in me alone shall cross over this Maya, now a practical way of dealing with it. He's talking really about devotion, accessing the truth, seeing things in the correct way. Again, Shankaracharya speaks of Maya as the power of the Lord, the energy, if you will. We can rephrase it, the energy of possibility, beginningless and compounded of the three gunas. And though, of course, they're intangible, invisible, just like everything else is invisible at the fundamental level, it can be inferred from the effect that it produces. The non-dualist Sadananda says, Maya is something positive, though intangible, which cannot be described as either being or non-being. And now we come to the argument, is it non-being, is it being, or is it possibility? These three options are laid out. In fact, actually, Aristotle lays these three avenues out. So it is neither being, nor is it non-being. We cannot say that the world is non-existent. We cannot say that it is all illusion and dismiss it in one go. No, we have to deal with some realities as we interpret them and as we relate to them. So from our point of view, it is being, but behind it, the philosophy provides us with the secret tool, the secret way of looking at things, that it is also non-being. It's inscrutable, that's the fact of it. And modern science is discovering this with this wave-particle duality puzzle. But it's not really a puzzle. You can't say that there is water and ice separate. You can't talk about the water and liquid ice duality. You can't talk about that problem. No, ice is the same under different conditions as water. That's all. It's only the form which is different. And so the Vedanta philosophy tells us about name, tells us about form, and tells us about substance. There is no gold and a ring. The ring and the gold is the same thing. There's no gold and a ring and a bracelet separate. There's gold is a substance. You can make whatever you like from it. You can make a ring, you can make a bracelet, you can make a cup, but gold is gold. It's only one substance. Clay is clay, regardless. What you make of it is different. So different, malleable, changing, shifting forms, always being there. But the substance is behind it all. And that is this unity of existence. That is this oneness that both modern physics talks about and the ancient Vedic system, the Vedanta, talks about it also. So Maya cannot be described either as being or as non-being, but that's why Maya is said to be indefinable. And if it were being in the true sense, then its effect, that is the tangible universe that we relate to, would be perceived everywhere at all times. It would never vanish. For being can never become non-being, and the real can never become unreal. But we can't hold, or we can't behold the universe in a condition that we experience, the highest empirical conclusion, a state called samadhi. In samadhi, where we are in communion with this oneness, with this Brahman, it is neither in a dreamless sleep, it's not in a waking state. But on the other hand, if Maya were also non-being, then a non-existent reality or non-existent unreality, and the example is always the impossible. Like the son of a barren woman is impossible. So the manifold universe, which cannot really be, which could not be seen in this state, it wouldn't be seen if it were non-being. And so we could see the world of names and forms as real, as we do, but Maya is said to be something positive according to the Sadananda. It is positive, it is not a nothing. It is an everything. It is a fulfillment. It is perfection undiluted. And this is the difference of opinion between the nihilists and the Vedantists. Emptiness is not there. Fullness is there. Purnamadam, Purnamidam, not Purnanat, Puduchate, Purnasya, Purnamadaya, Purnamaya Vashishyate is that peace prayer. Everything is full. You can't empty fullness. As I say often, you see, there's the famous optimist-pessimist scenario. You fill a glass half full, is half full for the positivist, is half empty for the negativist, the pessimist. But the Vedanta says you're wrong. There are no gaps anywhere. There are no voids anywhere. There's just a vast ocean of possibilities. And so even in the so-called material world, everything is full. There's no such thing as emptiness. And that fullness is only one thing, and that we call Brahman. So when we talk about the word something, it denotes its unsubstantiality or its worthlessness, because apart from Brahman, the world, in effect, is both unsubstantial, and therefore the value that we place on it is not only much less, but it goes completely when we realize this. You know, the word positive denotes its capability of producing the visible universe as a positive thing. But it also serves the purpose of removing erroneous notions that Maya or ignorance is pure negation, because it is just the absence of knowledge. That's all it is. It's equivalent to avidya. And as long as that avidya lasts, we have a difficulty. Our interpretation gives us this difficulty. Maya is said to be, therefore, antagonistic to knowledge, because both Maya and its effect, namely the so-called material universe, they disappear on the arrival or the dawning of knowledge, just as when the night is there and the sun dawns, gives an announcement with a reddish sky, and then the sun appears, let's say, over the ocean and spreads its waves in a glorious fashion. We saw a wonderful scene like that the other day, progressively growing and growing and growing. Then we realize the great joy of this Gayatri mantra, fundamental mantra, and the prayer. May that one which always exists and spreads its waves and appears as an effectual universe, may that illumination come to us also. May our minds be illuminated by it. So all this Maya disappears on the dawning of Brahman, the dawning of knowledge. And Brahman and Maya cannot coexist any more than the absolute and the relative. When the absolute is there, the relative is not. And when the relative is there, the absolute is not traced. The one and the many. When the one is there, the many is gone. When the many is there, we don't see the one. When one of these is perceived, the other one is non-existent. And so we can see them as not even correlatives. And that's why the question often gets asked as to how does the absolute become the relative world? Well, it's illogical and meaningless. It never became anything. There's no becoming. It only looks like that. It's like asking, when did the rope become the snake? The rope never became the snake. And if you're not familiar with the story, I'll just repeat it for those who are new to this. So in the twilight, in the evening, somebody goes out and sees something coiled up and immediately jumps to the conclusion that this is a threatening snake coiled up. And on discovery, that is, when a lantern is shown on the scene, when proper knowledge dawns about it, a revelation takes place. Oh, it's a rope coiled up in this way. So what happened was the rope was hidden. The snake was projected. There was a superimposition. And the light of knowledge revealed it. And the whole thing is called Maya. Somebody once said we should get rid of Maya. Well, you're getting rid of a useful aspect that acts as a tool to reveal something. And once a thing is revealed, you no longer need it. The ignorance vanishes by itself. You can't say, thank you for saving me from the snake. No, it's a rope. Have a look at it. Feel it, touch it, look at it. It always was a rope. It's a rope now. That's the fact of it. It doesn't have a head on it. It's not a serpentious herpetitis or whatever the biological name is for it. Illusorius, add that to the Latin name, if there is such a thing. Construct some kind of biological Latin name for it and assume that it is something that it is not. That doesn't happen. Naturally, it never happens. So we have to understand, now we know the structure of this illusion. Now we know that it is fully endorsed and validated by modern science. Now we know what the reality is in principle. How to access it in the reality of our daily life. In the relative reality, we should add, of our daily life. I mentioned briefly how we have to purify the mental field, how that has to be done through love of God, or through this discernment and the constant discrimination between real and unreal, or by not disturbing the mind through activities that create stress, activities orientated toward results, giving up the anxiety that accompanies pursuit of results called karma yoga, and by meditation. By one or more or all of these, says Swami Purnananda, be free. But he starts that whole statement off with each soul is potentially divine. So there's a potentiality there. A potentiality is all we're looking at when we view the world. The whole world is potentialities of possibilities. That's all we have. And so by doing this, we can enter into the game of life, with a new invigorated step once we know the truth about it. And so spiritual practice will reveal this aspect. What is the point of this whole thing? The point of it is Vedanta philosophy, just to recap, says there is oneness. There's a unity of existence. The question before us was, is there really such a thing as oneness? When our experience, we may add, is one of complete diversity. But the phenomena of quantum physics forces us to believe that the basis of the visible world doesn't rest on some material foundation. It's a realm of non-material forms, and they have the properties of waves. Now, this was worked out a long time ago, and these waves were called tanmatras, and their combinations and permutations and their crystallization of the familiar world around us, that is what we see. They are foundations, no doubt, but on a realm of non-material forms that have the properties of waves, as though our world were afloat on an invisible ocean. We've said how Western philosophy was born in Greece. We mentioned Parmenides, and in the years between, let's say, 600 and 400 BCE, this Western philosophy developed. But basically all the concepts and possible views of the world that have dominated the thinking that we have in this modern world would have originated at that time when people were interested in finding some sort of primeval stuff. And this has now gone along with us, and it has affected our moral and ethical values. Because if it is only stuff, and if stuff is important, and if matter is endorsed, and matter is important, then attaining it with a great deal of power and greed is important. And this has radical implications for the way we behave, or misbehave, I should say, in this world. If we take the opposite side and say that what we see as a materialistic universe is nothing more than a kind of dream, and that modern science has validated this so thoroughly, we have to get rid of these ideas, and with it, the selfishness that goes with this, and have more of a loving attitude, a holistic attitude, one that embraces an entire totality of existence. And therein lies our salvation. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thank you.